There is a rock on a mountainside in upstate New York, a flat shelf of gray limestone beside a waterfall. And for nearly 200 years, something has been eating off that rock. Something that walks on two legs. Something with amber eyes and a face that is not human. I have fed it every week for 41 years, and I have never told a single living soul. Until now. But before I tell you what I saw, before I describe the thing that stepped out of the trees and changed every single thing I thought I knew about this world, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand who I was before. Because the man who climbed that mountain was not the kind of man you would expect to find in a story like this. Not even close. My name is Rafael Medina. I'm 78 years old. I was born in the Bronx in 1947 to Cuban parents who came from Camagüey 7 years before I arrived. My father, Ernesto, worked the floor at a garment factory on 7th Avenue. My mother, Dolores, cleaned houses in Riverdale and cooked arroz con pollo on Sundays that made the whole building on Grand Concourse smell like home. I grew up speaking Spanish before English, eating picadillo and plátanos maduros, listening to Benny Moré on my father's turntable, learning very early that the world outside our apartment door did not always understand us. My father used to say in Spanish that a man's worth is measured by the weight of what he carries without complaint. I think about that every single day now. I did not become a man of the woods. I became an insurance adjuster, 27 years with Adirondack Mutual, starting in 1975, ending in 2002, ties and briefcases and company sedans. I drove across upstate New York, assessing damage claims for homeowners, farmers, small businesses, water damage, fire damage, storm damage, liability disputes. I was good at it because insurance adjusting is about one thing above all else: observation. You learn to see what people do not want you to see. You learn to read the story a damaged room tells. You learn that the gap between what someone claims happened and what actually happened is where the truth lives. And I learned on a Tuesday in October of 1984 that the gap between what the world believes exists and what actually exists is so wide you could lose your entire life inside it. Now, why was an insurance adjuster climbing a mountain alone with a hand-drawn map given to him by a Mohawk elder? What did that map lead to? And why had the elder's family been keeping this secret since 1831? Those answers start with a logging claim. Adirondack Mutual sent me to investigate a property claim near the town of Fort Hunter, Montgomery County, about 30 miles west of Schenectady. A timber company was claiming equipment losses on a forested parcel bordering Mohawk reservation land along the north bank of the Mohawk River. 2 chainsaws, a portable winch, a section of graded road, $11,000 total, modest, routine. Except nothing about this claim was routine. The incident report mentioned something that caught my eye before I even left the office. The entire logging crew, all 4 men, had refused to return to the site. Not one by one over days, all 4 on the same morning, walking off the job, forfeiting their pay. The site foreman's written statement said only this: "Something is living up in those trees that don't belong there." No elaboration, no follow-up when the company pressed. He quit 2 weeks later and moved to Binghamton. I drove out on a Tuesday morning. The leaves were burning orange and red on every hillside in the Mohawk Valley. I figured I would find claw marks from black bears, take photographs, fill out depreciation tables, be back in Schenectady by dinner. Maria was making ropa vieja that night. I had promised to bring home a loaf of good bread from the Italian bakery on State Street. I never made it to the bakery. I barely made it home at all. The access road was a dirt track running north from Route 5 into the hills. 2 miles in, it became little more than rutted trail cut through second-growth maple and ash. I parked the sedan where the ruts got too deep and walked the last quarter mile. What I found at that staging area did not match any damage pattern I had seen in 9 years of field work. Not one. The chainsaws were not simply broken. They were bent. The chain bar on one of them, solid steel, a rail designed to withstand enormous lateral forces, was twisted nearly 90 degrees, as if something had grabbed the end and torqued it like a man bending a paperclip. I knelt beside it and ran my fingers over the bend. Whatever did this had grip strength beyond anything I could calculate. The portable winch, close to 300 pounds, had been picked up and placed on a rock shelf 4 feet off the ground. Not dragged, not rolled, placed. I checked the dirt beneath it. No drag marks, no scuff trails, nothing. It had been lifted clean off the ground and set down, and the graded road section, 40 feet of cleared packed earth, had logs laid across it. Cut logs from the company's own staging pile, each one 6 to 8 feet long and a foot in diameter, arranged in a deliberate crosshatch pattern that blocked the road completely. I stood there for a long time looking at that pattern, the precision of it, the intention. Bears do not arrange logs. Bears do not bend steel bars. Bears do not lift 300-pound machines onto rock shelves. I took 36 photographs that morning. I still have them in a box in my closet. I have never shown them to anyone. I was walking back toward my car, my mind turning over explanations and finding none that fit, when I saw him. A man, standing at the edge of the tree line, about 50 yards north of the access road. Old. Even from that distance, I could see the deep lines in his face and the silver hair pulled back from his forehead. He wore a heavy canvas jacket and work boots. He was watching me the way you watch a deer that has not noticed you yet. Perfectly still, perfectly patient. I raised my hand in a wave. He did not wave back. He simply turned and walked into the trees. Something told me to follow him. Not curiosity, not professional obligation. Something deeper, something that felt like recognition. As though some part of me had been waiting for exactly this moment. I followed. His name was Joseph Clearwater, 61 years old that autumn. Kanyankiha Ka, Mohawk, of the Turtle Clan. He had lived his entire life on the reservation land bordering that logging site. He did not introduce himself right away. He walked and I followed. For 10 minutes, neither of us said a word. He moved through those trees with a sureness that made the forest feel like a hallway in his own home, stepping over roots, ducking branches without looking, his boots finding solid ground on a path I could not see. When he stopped, we were standing in a small clearing beside a creek that ran clear and cold over flat stones. He looked at me for a long time. "You are the insurance man." I told him I was. "You saw the road." I told him I did. "Do you know what did that?" I told him I did not. "Good. That means you might be honest enough to hear this." Now, what Joseph Clearwater told me next, sitting on a fallen log beside that creek, changed the direction of my entire life. But to understand the weight of what he said, you need to understand how far back this story reaches. Joseph told me about a man named Tehura Kwanakin, a Mohawk hunter who lived in the valley in 1831. Late autumn. He was hunting deer along the northern ridgeline when he came across something standing upright in a hemlock grove. It stood on two legs like a man, but it was not a man. It had the body of something between a man and a wolf. Broad across the shoulders, covered in dark fur, a head shaped wrong for a human, a long muzzle, pointed ears that swiveled toward sound, eyes that caught the fading light and held it like amber glass. 7 feet tall, maybe more. It looked at him, he looked at it, and the creature did something no wolf, no bear, no known animal had ever done in the presence of a Mohawk hunter. It stepped backward, slowly, deliberately, not fleeing, not threatening, not charging, choosing to give ground. Tehoraquanican understood what that meant. His people had always understood the language of the forest, not through words, through gesture, through intention, through the grammar of movement that every living thing speaks if you are quiet enough to listen. I see you seeing me. I am not your enemy. I am asking you to let me go. Tehoraquanican lowered his bow. The creature turned and walked into the hemlocks. Disappeared. And the next morning, outside his lodge, 3 rabbits lay in a neat row beside his door. Fresh, necks cleanly broken, no snares set. No one in the village had placed them there. A gift. An opening line in a conversation that would last almost 200 years. Joseph explained this slowly, carefully. The creature Tehoraquanican encountered was part of a group, a family. They lived in the deep woods north of the Mohawk River, in the rugged, heavily forested hills that most people never entered because the terrain was too punishing and the trees too thick. The Mohawk families who knew about them called them Okwahoshon. Joseph translated it roughly as the wolf walkers. Not werewolves, he said, seeing the look on my face, not spirits, not shapeshifters. Something real, something biological, something that had been living alongside human beings in those hills for longer than anyone could say, surviving by being smarter, faster, and more careful than anything else in the forest. The feeding tradition began with Tehoraquanican and continued through his descendants. Every autumn, when the deer were fat and the first frosts came, designated members of the Turtle clan brought offerings of dried meat, smoked fish, and corn to a specific location, a flat stone shelf beside a waterfall that Joseph called the feeding rock. They would leave the food and withdraw. By morning, the food was gone, and in its place, always something. Medicinal plants tied with stripped bark, quartz crystals. Once in 1911, a carved wooden figure depicting a human and a wolf-like creature standing side by side. These were not random objects. They were communications, acknowledgments, a language of exchange unbroken for generations. Then Joseph told me why he was telling me. Why now? Why me? They are angry, he said. The logging company is cutting trees in a corridor they have used for 200 years. They are warning you, all of you, and nobody is listening. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a piece of notebook paper folded many times, unfolded it on his knee, smoothed it with hands that were scarred and thick-knuckled from decades of work, a hand-drawn map, pencil on lined paper, the creek where we sat, the ridgeline to the north, trail markers indicated by small crosses, and at the center, a circle with a single word inside it in careful block letters, rock. We have not been able to go ourselves for 3 years. My son passed. My nephew moved to Syracuse. The young ones do not believe. The old ones cannot make the climb. He looked at me. You have honest eyes, insurance man. Mohawk people see the truth in a man's eyes. I'm asking you to go up there. Bring meat, bring tobacco, leave it on the rock and come back. Do not speak to them. Do not look for them. Just leave the offering and come back." He paused. "Go alone. They do not trust groups. They never have." I took the map. "I do not know why." "No, that is not true. I know exactly why. Because I had spent 9 years looking at damaged things and calculating their worth in dollars. And for the first time in my career, I was looking at something that could not be appraised, could not be filed, could not be reduced to a line item on a claims form. Something real, something impossible, something that had been waiting. I told Maria I had to go back to the site for follow-up photographs. She believed me because I had never given her a reason not to. That is the cruelest part of what I did. I built my deception on the foundation of her trust. I packed 4 pounds of beef jerky, 2 pounds of dried venison from a sportsman shop in Amsterdam, a pouch of loose-leaf tobacco, a thermos of coffee. I wore my heaviest boots and a blaze orange vest because it was deer season, and I'm not a foolish man, despite what this story might suggest. Joseph's map was precise. An insurance man appreciates precision. The creek crossings were exact. The trail markers, old blazes cut into maple trunks, some scarred over with decades of bark growth, appeared at the intervals indicated. I climbed for 2 hours through forests so dense that October sunlight reached the ground only in thin golden shafts that looked like spotlights on a stage. The temperature dropped as I gained elevation. My breath fogged. And the silence, not the absence of sound, a particular quality of quiet that felt intentional, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I found the feeding rock at approximately 11:30, exactly as Joseph described. Gray limestone jutting from the hillside beside a 15-foot waterfall, dropping into a dark pool, 8 feet across, remarkably level. Nature had built a table in the wilderness. The surface was worn smooth in places, and in the slight depressions where water pooled, there were old stains, dark patches, evidence, not the kind I documented for insurance claims. Evidence of continuity, of a promise kept across generations. Something about those stains made the hair on my arms stand up. I placed the jerky and venison in neat rows, set the tobacco pouch in the center, stepped back 20 feet, sat against a birch tree, poured coffee from the thermos. Part of me expected nothing. Part of me expected to sit there for an hour, drink my coffee, hike back down, and file the logging claim as weather-related equipment failure. Return to damage assessments and depreciation tables and Eros con pollo on Sundays. Then I heard the knocking. It came from the trees to my left, uphill, north. 3 distinct impacts. Not woodpecker strikes, not branches falling, 3 heavy, deliberate, evenly spaced blows, wood against wood, that resonated through the forest with a depth I could feel in my sternum. I froze with the coffee cup halfway to my lips. Silence. 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then from a different direction, downhill to the east, 3 more knocks answered. Same rhythm. Same weight, same deliberate spacing. Something was announcing my presence to something else, and whatever was listening had answered. I set down the cup. My hands were shaking. I was 36 years old, 178 pounds, a city-born Cuban kid from the Bronx who had never spent a night in the wilderness. And I was sitting alone on a mountainside, listening to something that was not human communicate in a language I could not speak but could somehow understand. The knocking meant he is here. He brought food. What do we do? I did not see it first, I smelled it. A heavy, musky odor like nothing in my experience. Not skunk, not decay, not any animal scent I could name. Something thick and organic and warm, like wet earth mixed with the musk of a large dog, but amplified 100 times. It rolled over me in a wave. I stopped breathing. Then I saw movement in the trees to the north. Not the quick darting motion of a deer. Something large, moving with a slow rolling gait that reminded me of a man carrying something very heavy across his shoulders. Walking upright, bipedal, coming closer. It stepped out of the tree line and into the clearing near the rock, and everything I thought I knew about the world folded in on itself like a house of cards in a windstorm. I need to describe this carefully. I need to describe it with the precision of a man who spent 27 years writing detailed damage reports, because precision is all I have. Emotion will not convince you. Sincerity will not convince you. But the details, the specific, granular, impossible to fabricate details, might. It was enormous. I am 5'10". This creature stood at least 7.5 feet tall, possibly 8, a torso that was broadly humanoid, thick muscled arms hanging past the knees, but a head that was unmistakably canine, long dark muzzle, lips pulled back slightly to reveal yellowed heavy teeth, ears sitting high on the skull and moving, rotating, scanning, independent of each other, like radar dishes tracking signals from multiple directions. Dark brown fur, almost black, across the shoulders and back. Lighter tawny brown on the chest and abdomen. The hands, and they were hands, not paws, had long articulated fingers tipped with thick black nails that looked like they could peel bark off a tree as easily as I could peel an orange. But the eyes are what I cannot forget, amber. Deep, luminous amber, like dark honey held up to sunlight, and they were looking at me with an expression I had seen before, but only in the eyes of human beings. Assessment, calculation. The creature was deciding what I was, not whether I was prey, not whether I was a threat, whether I was worth trusting. It stood there for what I estimated was 90 seconds. Although time had become unreliable. Then it walked to the feeding rock, moving with a silence that should have been impossible for something of its size. It picked up the jerky in one hand, all 4 pounds, fingers moving with the dexterity of a surgeon. It held the food close to its muzzle, inhaled deeply, looked at me, and it did the thing, the same gesture from 1831. A gesture passed down, not through human memory, but through the creature's own tradition. It stepped backward. 1 step. Slowly, deliberately. I see you seeing me. I am not your enemy. I am asking you to let me go. It turned and walked back into the trees, carrying the food. I sat against that birch tree for another hour, not because of fear, because I had the overwhelming sense that if I moved, if I broke the spell, the moment would become unreal. A story I told myself rather than something that happened. I needed it to stay real. I drove home, told Maria the inspection was done. Dinner smelled wonderful. I sat across from her at our kitchen table, eating ropa vieja and bread, and holding the most extraordinary secret a human being has ever held. And I said nothing. Nada. But here is what most people do not understand about what came next. They imagine one encounter, one terrifying moment, and then you go back to your life. That is not what happened. What happened is that I could not stop going back. Some part of me had been permanently rearranged, like a compass needle when you bring a magnet close. North was no longer north, The ordinary direction of my life had been overwritten. I went back the following week and the week after that. Every week through November until snow made the trail impassable. Each time I brought food, jerky, dried venison, smoked fish, whatever I could acquire, without raising suspicion at the shops I frequented. I rotated between stores. The sportsman's shop in Amsterdam one week, a butcher in Johnstown the next, a grocery in Kanajohari after that. I paid in cash. I told no one what the food was for. I was building a supply chain for a feeding operation that existed entirely in my own mind and on a flat rock on a mountainside, and I managed it with the same methodical precision I brought to every insurance claim I had ever filed. Each time I sat by the birch tree, waited, listened, let the forest decide what it wanted to show me. The second visit, nothing. The third, knocking, but no sighting. The fourth visit, the creature returned, stayed longer, 5 minutes, eating slowly, watching me. I noticed details I had missed. A scar across its left shoulder, old, healed, a thick ridge of lighter fur over what must have been a devastating wound, a slight hitch in its gait when it turned. One hip did not rotate freely. This was not young. This was something that had survived decades in those hills, carrying injuries, enduring winters, avoiding detection by an entire civilization, living just miles below the ridgeline. The most competent living thing I had ever encountered. By the sixth visit, mid-November, the creature no longer retreated after taking food. It would lower itself onto its haunches with a groan that sounded disturbingly human and eat while I sat 15 feet away, close enough to see individual guard hairs ripple in the wind, close enough to hear its breathing, slow, deep, rhythmic, close enough to smell that thick musk I had begun to associate not with danger, but with presence, with companionship. That is when I knew I was in trouble. Not physical trouble, emotional. I was beginning to care about this creature the way you care about a neighbor you check on after a storm. And Maria knew something had changed. She did not say so directly. That was not her way. Maria Dolores Fuentes, born in Hialeah, Florida, 1949. She communicated concern through small adjustments in the domestic landscape. When she worried, she cooked more, pressed my shirts with extra care, left the porch light on even when I said I would be home before dark. That winter of 1984, the porch light was on every evening. I wanted to tell her. I would lie in bed listening to her breathe, and the words would build in my throat like water behind a dam. And I would swallow them down and dream of amber eyes and heavy footsteps on frozen ground. Why did I keep silent? Why did I not tell the one person I trusted most? The answer is the ugliest truth in this story. I was selfish. The secret was mine. The experience was mine. The relationship was the most extraordinary thing in my life, and I did not want to share it, not even with the woman I loved. That selfishness cost me something I can never get back. Spring, 1985. Snow melted. I returned. The creature was waiting, not at the rock, in the trees, 40 yards uphill, sitting with its back against a massive hemlock, watching the trail I always took. It had learned my route, learned my schedule, was expecting me. I stopped. It looked at me. Something passed between us. Not greeting. Something older. We see each other. We know each other. This is what we do now. For the first time, it came to the rock while I was still sitting and ate less than 15 feet away. I could have reached out and touched its fur. That spring I also learned there were more of them. Late April. I arrived and found 3 brook trout on the rock, freshly caught in a neat row, 6 quartz stones of varying sizes, and scratched into the earth beside the rock. A shape, a circle with a smaller circle inside it, an eye. They had left me a message. The language of exchange was being extended to me, a Cuban kid from the Bronx, an insurance adjuster in a company sedan, the most unlikely guardian the wolf walkers had ever had. Over the next decade, 1985 to 1995, I built a relationship that defied every rational framework I possessed. And I need to slow down here, because what happened over those 10 years is what separates my story from a sighting. Anyone can see something strange in the woods once, a shadow, a shape, a sound that does not belong. You tell it at a dinner party and people nod and say, "How strange." But what I am describing is not a sighting. It is a relationship. And relationships take time. They take patience. They take a willingness to show up again and again, even when the other party gives you nothing, especially when they give you nothing. The Woodknocks had a vocabulary. I learned it the way a child learns a language, through repetition, context, and the slow accumulation of patterns. 3 evenly spaced knocks meant acknowledgement. I'm here. I hear you. 2 quick knocks followed by a pause, and a third meant caution. Something is wrong. Be careful. A single sustained blow that rang through the trees like a drum meant danger. Leave now. There were subtler variations, rhythms I could not fully decode, but that clearly carried meaning to the creatures themselves. Sometimes at dusk, I would sit by my birch tree and hear a sequence of knocks, passing from north to south across the hillside like a conversation, and I would close my eyes and listen the way you listen to music in a language you do not speak, feeling the emotion even when the words escape you. I learned their territorial markers, twisted saplings bent into arches that pointed toward trails, stacked stones at creek crossings, scratches on bark at specific heights that I came to believe indicated the maker's identity, the way a signature identifies a person. Some of these markers changed seasonally. New arches would appear in spring. Old stone stacks would be rearranged. The forest was a living map that they were constantly updating, and once I learned to read it, I could never look at a stretch of woods the same way again. Every bent branch became a possible word, every arrangement of stones a possible sentence. The family was at least 6 individuals. The elder, the scarred male I had first encountered, the one who had taught me through years of patient, silent repetition that trust is not given but built. 2 younger males, slightly smaller, but faster and more agile. I saw them only at distances and in fleeting glimpses. Dark shapes moving through the trees with a speed that made me understand why these creatures had never been caught on film. They could cover ground faster than anything I had ever seen move in a forest. One moment they were there, the next, nothing but swaying branches and disturbed air. There was a female, broader in the hips, with lighter fur on the face and a different quality to her vocalizations, lower and more resonant than the males. I saw her twice in the company of the elder, walking side by side through the trees in a way that suggested a bond so deep and long established it needed no demonstration. They simply moved together, the way old married couples move together, each anticipating the other without looking. And there were young ones. I heard them before I saw them. High-pitched yips and barks that came from the dense undergrowth near the waterfall, playful sounds that were unmistakably the sounds of children. Whatever species those children belonged to, they played the way all children play, with joy and noise and a complete disregard for the caution their parents practiced. Joseph Clearwater told me stories during this period I have never repeated. Not to anyone, not to Maria, not to my children, not even to myself, in the quiet hours when the mind replays its catalogue of experiences and decides which ones to keep polished and which ones to let fade. These stories I kept polished. I kept them sharp and vivid in my memory, because they were not mine to let go of. They belonged to Joseph's family and to the wolf walkers and to a history that stretched back further than any of us. He told me that when the Mohawk Council debated in 1831, the clan mothers decided the wolf walkers were kin. Not human, not animal, kin. And the duty of kin is to feed kin in hard times and keep kin's secrets in all times. He told me about 1907, a logging operation cutting deep into the territory. A month of silence, no knocks, no exchanges. Then on the first night of the new moon in December, a sound rose from the hills that his grandmother called the saddest thing she ever heard, a howl. Not a wolf's howl, deeper, longer, a grief that transcended species. A young one had died in a collapsed earth bank from the logging disruption. Trust took years to rebuild after that. Joseph told me this looking directly into my eyes. Handle it with your whole heart, or do not handle it at all. But what happens when the thing you are protecting faces a threat you cannot scare away with words? Summer of 1991, late July, Saturday morning. I was sitting at the feeding rock when I heard voices on the trail below. Male, loud, careless, hard-edged, laughing, swearing, crashing through underbrush. 3 men entered the clearing. Camouflage, rifles. 2 had compound bows on their backs. 1 carried a trail camera in a plastic case. Poachers, out of season. One of them pointed at the rock. There. That's where Donnie said he saw the tracks. My blood went cold. Someone had been up here. Found evidence, told these men. Without thinking, without any plan or courage, just desperate need, I stepped out of the trees and shouted. Told them they were on reservation land. Told them I was a federal wildlife officer conducting a survey. I lied with the fluency of a man who had spent years assessing other people's lies and knew how to make one convincing. I stood there in hiking boots and a button-down shirt and reading glasses on a cord, and I lied to 3 armed men. One argued, said the land was public access. I pulled my Adirondack mutual ID from my wallet. Held it just long enough for him to see the seal and photo, but not long enough to read the text. Told him I would radio game wardens if he was not off the mountain in 30 minutes. They left. Cursing, kicking at brush, but they left. I stood in that clearing with my heart hammering so hard I could hear my own blood in my ears. My shirt was soaked with sweat beneath my arms. My hands would not stop trembling. I had never in my life confronted armed men. I was an insurance adjuster. I carried a briefcase and a calculator and a company-issued tape measure. I had no weapon, no radio, no authority. I had a laminated ID card and a voice that did not shake as much as my hands did, and that had been enough. Barely. And from somewhere in the trees to the north, close, terrifyingly close, so close that the creature must have been watching the entire confrontation unfold, a single wood knock. One sustained blow. Not the danger signal. Something I had never heard before. It sounded like gratitude. I sat down right there on the ground. My legs would not hold me anymore. I sat, and I pressed my palms into the dirt, and I breathed and I realized something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I had chosen a side, not consciously, not intellectually, but in the moment of crisis, when 3 men with guns stood between me and the creatures I had been feeding for 7 years, I had not hesitated. I had stepped forward. And that choice, that instinctive, unrehearsed, irrevocable choice, told me more about who I had become than any amount of self-reflection ever could. 2 weeks later, a gift on the rock, a deer antler, not a shed antler, fresh, still attached to a section of skull plate, 8-point buck, symmetrical, the kind a hunter would mount on a wall, placed in the exact center, oriented toward my birch tree. Beside it, the quartz stones, the 3 fish. You protected us. We acknowledge the debt. I picked up the antler and I cried, 43 years old, standing on a mountainside holding a gift from something science said could not exist, given in recognition of an act no one in the world would ever know about. The weight of that solitude and that privilege and that responsibility broke something open inside me. I cried for 10 minutes, and when I stopped, the elder was standing at the edge of the tree line. 20 feet away, the expression on that canine face, the set of the amber eyes, the angle of the ears, the slight forward lean of the massive shoulders, was something I can only call compassion. The years passed the way years do when you are living 2 lives simultaneously, one in the light, one in the shadow. By day, I was Rafael Medina, claims adjuster, devoted husband, father of 2, the man who brought Cuban pastries from the bakery on J Street to the office holiday party. By night, I was the guardian of a secret so vast it made everything else feel like scenery, painted on a thin backdrop. I retired in 2002. Our son Gabriel went to SUNY Albany and became a history teacher. Our daughter Eleanor married a man from Syracuse and gave us 2 grandchildren. Maria never asked directly about my trips. She accepted them the way she accepted my other habits. Checking the locks twice, waking before dawn, preferring black coffee from my father's old Collador over the drip machine. She folded my hiking clothes without comment, packed my thermos without being asked. The most generous, patient, quietly extraordinary woman I have ever known, and I repaid her with 40 years of silence. In 2015, Maria was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. In 2017, a stroke. I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, watching her struggle to form words, thinking I should tell her now. If she is losing her words, I should give her mine. I did not. Maria died on March 11th, 2019. Cerebral hemorrhage. 69 years old. She went to bed feeling tired on a Sunday night. She did not wake up Monday morning. I found her beside me, still warm. Her face turned toward the window. She had died looking at the sky. I touched her cheek, and it was soft, and I knew before my fingers left her skin that she was gone, and that there were things I would carry now that made every other secret I had ever held feel like nothing. We had been married for 43 years, 43 years of shared meals and shared silences, and a house full of photographs, and a backyard where our children learned to walk, and a kitchen that always smelled like garlic and sofrito, and love rendered into food. 43 years, and for every single one of them, I had been lying to her. Not about other women, not about money, not about anything the world would recognize as betrayal, but about the thing that mattered most to me, the thing that had reshaped my entire understanding of what was real and what was possible. I had hidden it from her the way you hide medicine from a child. telling myself it was for her own good, knowing in my heart it was for mine. I buried her beneath a silver maple at St. John the Baptist Cemetery in Schenectady, stood at her grave and spoke the words I should have spoken 40 years earlier. I told the cold ground and the bare trees and the grey March sky, everything, the wolf walkers, the feeding rock, the elder, the map, the antler on my wall she thought I bought at a flea market, the stones on my windowsill where she kept her ceramic saints. The ground could not hear me. The trees did not care. The sky was indifferent. The only person who should have heard was gone. That was entirely my fault. Now, you need to know what is happening today, because this story does not end in the past. Joseph Clearwater is alive, 102 years old, living with his granddaughter on the reservation. He cannot make the climb, has not been able to, for 15 years. I have been the sole maintainer of the tradition since 2010. Every week, spring through fall, I drive to Fort Hunter and hike that trail and leave offerings on the stone. The elder is gone. I do not know when he died. I do not know how. Whether it was age or injury or sickness or something else entirely, something belonging to the biology of a creature that science has never studied and may never get the chance to study. What I know is this. I arrived one spring after a long, harsh winter, the kind of upstate winter that buries the world in grey for months and makes you wonder if green things will ever return. I climbed the trail expecting to find the rock empty, expecting to leave my offerings and wait for the knocks that told me the family had survived another season. Instead, I found a cairn, 7 stones beside the waterfall, stacked with a precision that could not have been accidental, each stone placed deliberately on top of the last, on the exact spot where I had seen the elder sit and eat so many times across so many years that his haunches had worn a smooth depression into the earth. It was a grave marker. I knew it the way I knew the wood knocks and the twisted saplings and the quartz crystals. Not through logic, through the accumulated grammar of a language I had spent decades learning. I knelt beside it, pressed my forehead against the cold stone, and I grieved for something that was not an animal, not a friend in any way the human world would recognize, but a being that had taught me more about trust and patience and the cost of keeping faith than any person I have ever known. I grieved for the amber eyes I would never see again, for the scarred shoulder and the hitching gait, for the low groan when it settled onto its haunches, for the gesture, that ancient, careful, deliberate backward step that had connected its kind to mine across nearly 2 centuries. The younger ones are still there, more cautious than the elder ever was, but the exchanges continue. Food on the rock, stones and plants in return, wood knocks in the twilight. The language endures. But for how much longer? I need to stop and breathe. The fibrosis is worse today. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The tissue in my lungs is scarring over, hardening, replacing the soft parts that let me breathe with something that feels like wet cement, settling a little more each morning. The doctors at Albany Medical cannot tell me why, cannot tell me how to undo it, can only tell me how much time I have left. That number gets smaller every visit. My doctor, a young woman named Patel, who looks at my lung scans with controlled concern the way I used to look at flood damage photographs, told me last month I am between stage 3 and 4, 40% lung capacity. I get winded walking from the kitchen to the living room. Last September, I had to stop 3 times on the trail. hands braced on my knees, chest heaving, trees spinning around me. I made it to the rock, left the offerings, heard the knocks. But I knew, sitting there with my ruined lungs wheezing, my back against my birch tree, I knew I did not have many more trips left. That is why I am speaking now, not for fame, not for validation. I have the photographs, 36 of them in a box in my closet. I have the antler. I have Joseph Clearwater's map, still folded in my breast pocket where it has lived for 4 decades. Pencil lines faded but legible. I have the stones on my windowsill. I am speaking because someone needs to continue the tradition after I'm gone. Someone needs to know that on a mountainside in upstate New York, in a stretch of forest most people will never see, there is a flat stone shelf beside a waterfall where 2 species have been communicating for nearly 200 years. The wolf walkers are real. They are intelligent. They are watching. They have been watching since before your great-great-grandparents were born. And they will be watching long after you and I are dust. I think about Maria every day. I think about that first night, October 1984, sitting across from her eating ropa vieji, holding the most incredible secret a human being has ever held, saying nothing. Sometimes, in the early mornings, when every breath feels like pulling air through a wet towel, I imagine a different version of my life. A version where I told her everything that first night. Where she looked at me with those dark, fierce, beautiful eyes and said, "Show me." Where we hiked that mountain together, her hand in mine, she saw the elder step from the trees. Her breath caught. She squeezed my fingers and whispered, "Dios mío, Raphael." I like to think the wolf walkers would have accepted her. They accepted me, an outsider, a city man, a claims adjuster who could not tell a hemlock from a pine. They accepted me because Joseph Clearwater vouched for me, because I came alone, brought food, asked for nothing, sat quietly. Let them decide on their own terms. Maria would have done all of that and more. She would have been better at this than me. She was better at everything that mattered. Gabriel does not know. Eleanor does not know. My grandchildren do not know. Joseph's granddaughter knows parts, the Mohawk history, the tradition, but she has never met the creatures. I am running out of time and running out of breath. The oxygen concentrator hums beside my bed every night. The tightness in my chest is a fist slowly closing. What happens to the wolf walkers when the last person who feeds them dies? What happens to a 200-year relationship when no one is left to maintain it? I do not have answers. I have a map, a story, 41 years of weekly hikes and wood knocks and quartz stones and the amber gaze of something that should not exist but does. I have the memory of a creature stepping backward in a hemlock grove in 1831 and saying, without words, "I am not your enemy." And I have the memory of myself, a young man with a briefcase and a company sedan, standing in a clearing with a hand-drawn map in his pocket, with no idea he was about to become the custodian of the most beautiful and terrible secret in the history of human contact with the unknown. If you are listening, and something in my voice tells you I am not lying, and something in your chest responds to this story the way mine responded when Joseph Clearwater unfolded his map on his knee, then maybe you are the one. Maybe you are the next guardian. Maybe the wolf walkers are waiting for you the way they waited for Tehoraquanecan in 1831, and the way they waited for me in 1984. But understand this. If you go alone. You carry the food and the tobacco. You leave it on the stone. You sit quietly. You wait. You do not speak. You do not reach for your phone. You do not tell the world. You carry the weight of what you see for the rest of your life, and you do it without complaint, because that is what a man's worth is measured by. My father told me that. The wolf walkers taught me it was true. My name is Rafael Medina. I am 78 years old. My lungs are turning to stone. And the most important thing I have ever done in my life is climb a mountain with a pocket full of beef jerky and sit quietly while something impossible decided I was worthy of its trust.